Well, I spent the last couple of days at the Fountain of Praise Church covering the funeral services for George Floyd. It was a very powerful service, as many of you witnessed firsthand. I sat down with the founders of the church, Pastors Mia and Remus Wright, and asked, now what? Where do we go from here?
There's a reason why George Floyd's service and viewing is at this church.
Yes, in fact, Pastor Remus Wright and I pastor and shepherd one of the members of the Floyd family. Sharita Tate McGee is George Floyd's first cousin, and they grew up very close together. And when we saw his death, when we saw what was circulating in social media, we reached out to her and said, Sharita, your family is here for you. What can we do? And she asked, if we need you, can we have the services there? At the time, it was just the death of a man that was about to occur, and not the spark of a whole movement that was happening in the nation and in the world. And so it's become much bigger.
It really has. And one of the things that we were concerned with is being able to help the family through this period of grief. Because there's been so much publicity and media behind this, the family hasn't really had an opportunity to grieve. And our job is to try to bring hope, healing, and restoration to the family. That's what most
How are
important.
they doing?
They're doing, I would say, well as can be expected, because, I think they've had a lot of people around them, embracing them, showing them love and compassion. But in terms of walking through the steps of the death that has occurred, I don't think they've had an opportunity to do that yet. And that's the reason why at the church, when we do the service, it's about celebration. It's about celebration. All the other things, we're moving forward, and we're celebrating the life of a man that has now put his imprint in all of our history.
Yeah. And of course, the hard part is that you see it over and over and over again. There have been a number of people who've made the statement, why would so many people show up for a man they did not even know? And I would say that's because all of us are represented in him somewhere.
Deborah, I saw a sign that someone had painted on a wall, and they said, when he cried out for his mama, he summoned mothers everywhere. And I get emotional just thinking about that, because as a mother to black boys, it breaks my heart to know what has happened, not just now, but in the past with the injustices, the racial profiling, and how my sons are looked at differently than our neighbors' children. And so we all have come together. People from every nation, people from every ethnicity, people from all around the world said enough is enough. And so they're coming to show their respects to this man who died in a very traumatic way, and his family had to witness that. But they're also coming to say that our voices matter. And they are protesting. They are showing their belief for what they feel is change is necessary in this nation. And so we're in support of that, because we believe the change is also necessary in this nation.
It's about humanity.
It's about humanity.
I was listening to a conversation of several people out in the line, and what was good to see was community. So you saw people of different races, you saw people of different ages. And so there's one woman who said, we've done this before. Why are we doing this again? Because she marched in the 60s. I know with my parents, they sat in the lunch counter in the 50s. They grew up on a cotton farm, in the 20s and 30s. And so we've done this before. But the nature of human beings is we have to be ever vigilant. I don't think we'll ever be done.
Right.
My grandfather and my great uncle walked and marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. My great-great-grandfather was in Mississippi an advocate for starting voting rights for the former slaves. And so both of us have history of people who have served this nation in a manner to help equalize what it could be for all humanity. And so when we look and see how far we've come, but then how far we have not come, it just serves as a source to remind us that systemic racism is in place, and that those are the barriers that need to be broken down. They're historical, they're deeply rooted, and many times they're unseen, and people don't realize, they don't understand the depth to which they are occurring in this nation. And so the awareness has to happen. People have to be ready to deal with some things that are uncomfortable, but ready to say it's time for a change.
You talk about awareness and also self-awareness, and you talked about history. I've said this over and over again too, because when I saw it on a piece of paper, I was shocked at how it slapped me in the face, and I cried, because my father's grandparents were sold into slavery for $100 a piece. It was 8 8 people, a family of 8 in 1863. A lot of us don't know where we come from and the sweat and blood and tears that went into hoping that the next generation would do better. And so know your history. Some of it starts with just know who you are.
That's true. And you know, we're living in a day and age where these young people today, the Generation Z group, they're not standing for it. They're going to demonstrate, they're going to protest. Certainly we're against the rioting, the looting, we're against all of that, but that's an expression that some of them that have not been given the kind of insight on what this is all about have used as a tool to try to be heard. And I think that what this has done, George Floyd's life has led to a lot of dialogue and discussion. But then also, Deborah, it's made us look inward and ask ourselves the question, while implicit bias can be for everybody, systemic racism should be for nobody. And so we're concerned about the fact that now we're living in a day and age where people that do all that they can do in education, in terms of business, that want to just be considered equal. It's important nowadays that, you know, that we stand up, each and every person.
But we had a civil rights bill that was passed in the 60s that said we were equal. I think a lot of people feel like what we did was we after 1968 and the riots, and people said we're done, we made some changes, right? But changes on paper are different than changes for real.
That's right.
And I just feel like we kind of came to the middle and got comfortable and forgot about not finishing the work, and what was just kind of right below the surface has now just come to full surface.
And I don't know if we means that, you know, African Americans or people in minority positions have not completed the work. It takes
when I say complete the work, I mean community.
Yes.
I mean everybody.
Okay.
I mean absolutely.
Yeah,
it doesn't work unless it's everybody.
Absolutely. It
That's
takes
right.
everyone to complete the work. We all have to work together. We have to recognize where there's privilege that exists. We have to recognize where those biases are. We have to see the systemic racism and how it is inbred in our system, in our everyday culture of America. And then what do we do to change it? Where does policing start? Does it start in schools where our children are in schools that have more problems because there are more minorities, and so now they increase more policing in the school, so it normalizes policing? Does it start in the community where we have more blacks or Latinos living in certain areas? They're more impoverished and they say there's more crime, so they start to send more police in there. Where does it start? And we all have to start individually and ask ourselves, what are we doing to contribute to the problem? And how can we change that? We have to think, as he said, the systemic racism is what is for nobody, but everyone has biases. Every person has it, but we have to challenge those biases and ask, where do they come from? They've been normalized. The media has normalized it through television. We see shows that have black people as always the bad guys, you know, and we don't see families together. But we have a 30-year marriage. We have 2 sons who are college educated. One's a doctor, one's a lawyer. We have another who's a minister. You know, so this is a normal thing for our family. So we have to change what is norm and what is acceptable within the African American communities.
That's actually the bigger conversation, is how do we look at reform? How do we reform this country in terms of people having dialogue and discussion? Because mixed marriages, interracial marriages, these are commonplace in our country. This is a country of immigrants. Even though we may not have been immigrants, our grandparents and great-grandparents, that's where they came from. And I think when you look at a community that, you know, the tax base is extremely high in that community, and yet the schools are poor. When you look at a community and you have older people and even young people that don't have good health, you know, these are issues that we think systemically cause a problem and a blight upon any community. People need to have access to that, and that's one of the things in this church that we try to emphasize. We're not just a church that preaches every day about heaven and hell. We're a church that preaches about keep your body saved, get a proper education. We'll help you to get where you're trying to go. Build a business. Put a business plan together.
We know that the civil rights movement basically was born in the church.
That's
All right,
right.
there's legislation, so there's our lawmakers, there's our celebrities who have a big voice that's influential. But what would you say to every individual after the protests are over with, the rallies are done, the funeral service is over? What can every individual do now?
You know, there's a lot of talk about racism right now, and I think it makes a lot of people very uncomfortable to talk about racism. And because it's rooted in our country, it's very emotional for a lot of people. But I will say this, that have the conversation, reflect, read, Educate yourself. Doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. You should understand how racism affects you, how it impacts you, how it benefits you to the detriment of others, because that's exactly what it is. And then say, how can I become anti-racist? And to become anti-racist means you stand up to the face of it. That means you challenge, you don't accept it, because many of us have been silent for so long. And it's going to take black people, white people, Latino people, all of us joining together, Asian people, all of us coming together to say, you know what? This has bias in it, and let's not settle for it, because we're better than that. We're Americans. As Christians, we stand up for it. We stand up for the equality that God has given us. In Galatians 3, he talks about us being not neither Jew or Gentile, male or female, slave or bondsman. The Bible gives us we are one in Jesus Christ.
Human.
And you know, there's another scripture in Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 15 that is very important to me, because it talks about this man that has a responsibility to his community, but he really doesn't have a full picture of the people in the community. And the Bible says God takes him to a place, and then he responds by saying, I sat where they sit. And I think that that's so important, Deborah. People have to be able to recognize how black people have felt with the little indignities. The little indignities. You get on an elevator, and you know, and people that are of a different color, they back away, or either they close the door before you can get on. You know, you go to a grocery store, and you know, people watching you for everything you do. We've had a situation in our community just last week that's a reflection of that. People feel threatened by you. Why feel threatened by a person that hasn't done anything to you?
Stereotypes.
Stereotypes.
And that one phrase that brings us all together, because we can all understand that, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. And we all need air to breathe. And this is what is going to challenge us in the United States. How do we all breathe together? Because the same air, we're all human. The same air that you breathe, I breathe. And so we are all human. This will be a uniting force. Mr. Floyd did not die in vain. His death, as tragic as it was, and as visible as it become all around the world, has become a catalyst for change.
Absolutely.
And it will be that.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you,
Bless you.
Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah.